SoundCloud. So as you can see, the talk is going to be recorded. It will later be uploaded to the YouTube channel of the Center for Jewish Studies at the Graduate Center. And I want to invite you to keep your microphones muted during the talk. After the talk, we will have time for questions. Professor Heilman and Professor Bilici will begin with a brief introduction that will be followed by a dialogue between the two of them on some of the main themes of the book, and we will have time for a Q&A from the public after that. And I think we've all become very adept at using Zoom for this kind of program, so you all know what to do. Please feel free to use the hand raise function. You can type the word question in the chat box, and we can read your question if you are not able to unmute yourself. We will go in the order that we receive. And now it's time to introduce our speakers. Samuel Heilman is a distinguished professor emeritus of sociology at Queens College and the CUNY Graduate Center, where he held the Harold Proshansky Chair in Jewish Studies. His work focuses on contemporary Jewish Orthodox movements in the United States. Heilman is the author of numerous books. I'm not going to be able to list them all, but I will include a few, such as Portrait of American Jews, The Last Half of the 20th Century, Defenders of the Faith Inside Ultra-Orthodox Jewry, The Rebbe, The Life and Afterlife of Menachem Mendel Schneerson with Menachem Friedman, Who Will Lead Us, the story of 5 Hasidic dynasties in America, and is one of the authors of Hasidism, A New History. Professor Heilman is the recipient of 3 National Jewish Book Awards, as well as many other honors after retiring. From CUNY in 2020 to Jerusalem, he now serves as a library fellow in the Polonsky Library at the Van Leer Institute. Mucahit Bilici is Associate Professor of Sociology at John Jay College and the CUNY Graduate Center. He is the author of multiple books in Turkish, as well as Finding Mecca in America, How Islam is Becoming an American Religion, that came out with University of Chicago Press in 2012. His research focuses on American Islam, Muslim studies, Kurdish identity, and Turkish society. Bilici is a faculty fellow at the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center and a frequent commentator and public speaker on Kurdish and Muslim issues in the contemporary Middle East. And together, as mentioned before, Professors Heilman and Bilici are the authors of Following Similar Paths, What American Jews and Muslims Can Learn from One Another. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm picked to start off. First, I want to say it's a real pleasure for me, after spending my entire career at Queens and at the Graduate Center at CUNY, to be able to do that sitting here in my study 6,000 miles away or more in Jerusalem. But I still feel as if I'm at home at CUNY. So I want to start this book, which took a long time for Mucahit and I to write, in part because we had to do it across distances, and because it was a complicated thing for us to put together. But I want to start with what is an epigraph of our book. It's a brief story that, in a way, encapsulates the thing that we are trying to do in this book. It's freshman week at a respected university in North Carolina, and 2 chaplains, the Hillel rabbi and the campus imam, are chatting at the end of the week, comparing notes. I had some parents come to me and ask if I would keep an eye on their son, encourage him to attend prayers on Friday, make sure he eats only the permitted food, and dates only girls who share his faith. They tell me that they agreed to their son coming to this school because of its high academic reputation, but they worried about whether he'll manage to be a student here without dropping the religious commitments with which he was raised. The other chaplain, the Hillel rabbi, responds, Abdullah, I had the exact same conversation. The intuition that we gathered from this story really led to this book. And the book is, you might say, an annotation, notes on how it happens that these two chaplains are having such parallel experiences. We began this project with the conviction that in America, religiously observant Jews and observant Muslims walk what we call similar paths, meaning that they're attached, and particularly the observant among them, they're attached to their respective faiths, observances. They perform a kind of tightrope walk, trying to be able to, in a sense, be both connected and attached, a balancing act, responding to the demands of American culture without sacrificing their religious obligations, their commitments, and even when they resist the forces of American assimilation, which are very much a part of American life, they follow similar paths. They have many of the same experiences. It's not identical. They're not completely parallel, and I'm sure Mucahit will show you in ways how they are similar and how they are different. But as such, it occurred to us that these two groups have much to learn from one another. Of course, it's not unusual. It's not hard to imagine, because the parallels and connection between Judaism and Islam in general are well documented. And there are traces of remarkable cultural exchanges between Jews and Muslims across time. They're both religions that place a very high premium on behavior. They share many stories in their sacred texts. And for the most part, contemporary considerations of the relationship between Muslim and Jews has been trapped by focusing on the Middle East and on that sliver of land that appears to be the frontier between the competing claims to territory and history. For a little over 75 years, Muslims and Jews, both of whom claim roots in the Abrahamic story, have been considered largely through the prism of that conflict over Israel and Palestine. And the enmity that remains focused over this dispute has, of course, as we well know now, spread beyond the Middle East and increasingly invaded places where Jews and Muslims could have lived peacefully in proximity to one another, most dramatically perhaps in modern France, but also elsewhere in Western Europe, and since October 7th, even in America, where for the most part, these two groups have managed to live near each other in places as common as New York and Chicago and New Jersey, and even on our campus in Queens, the Muslim Association, Muslim Student Association in Hillel, literally are neighbors across the hall from one another, and have often done many things together. And if we can look past, at least for this session on this book, if we can look past the post-October 7th explosion, which we can only hope will yield to a satisfactory resolution for all parties to the conflict, careful observers, who I think, and I think my colleague agrees with me, can, with the help of our book, see something else much more helpful, that there are patterns of behavior, beliefs, concerns, culture, religion, that reveal particular similarities and possibly even the basis for a common American experience. America, remember, is a neutral territory. Neither Jews nor Muslims can make claims that this is our sovereign space. And as a result of that, what both Mucahit and I and others before us reveal that they have what Ludwig Wittgenstein famously called family resemblances. It's these family resemblances that our book seeks to point out and reveal. And to get at the story, we focused on many of the common features of Muslim. By the way, I think it's important to remember, in America, Muslims are not overwhelmingly Middle Easterners. They are South Asians, Europeans, Turkish, Kurdish, and a variety of other ethnic groups. But in America, of course, they're all thrown into the basket of being Muslim. But Jewish life and culture has much in common with all of these Muslim ethnic groups. And even though this is sort of an interesting intellectual exercise in trying to see those parallels, we also believe that there's a more detailed understanding of each one of these groups and how they have adapted in that relatively neutral territory of America, where both Muslims and Jews are viewed as a minority, are viewed as the other, perhaps more than any other single large religious group in America, and can offer insights into how they both experience being the other. This is especially the case against the backdrop of an America that at one point sought to homogenize everyone, as we all know that term, the melting pot ideal. But until very recently, America had embraced multiculturalism. When there was the rise in the 70s and 80s of the last century of the unmeltable ethnics that had its moment in the sun in America to allow for the expression of difference. We may be entering another period in America now where that is not going to happen as easily as it did in the past. The diversity of America, of course, is a whole question that we could talk about endlessly, but that's not our subject for tonight. But the fact is that in that kind of a more multicultural America, Jews, and particularly the Orthodox among them, and Muslims, and particularly the observant ones among them, have for a while been able to express their attachments to their religion and have struggled with the cultural question of whether to continue to stand apart or to become part of America. And that has been a struggle ongoing. But the people that we're talking about in this book have been living in America where they don't have to operate in that kind of environment. They have embraced acculturation, meaning they have embraced being American, but they have not embraced assimilation. They've both found ways of standing with a foot in both their own religious observance and traditions and culture, and in America, this kind of hybrid character. And it is those trajectories in which both first Jews who were here first, in a sense, and particularly the observant Jews, found a way to navigate these two worlds, these two cultures, have in some ways pointed in a direction that the Muslims, who in a sense have come in greater numbers after the Jews to America, can learn from and have created a kind of version of. And the areas that we look at in the book are laws, comparing halakha, Jewish law, and Sharia, Muslim law, diet, kosher food and halal food, identity, the yarmulke, the hijab, the public identity, the role of preachers, the rabbi and the imam, both of whom are redefined in America as clergy, the study and education, the yeshiva and the madrasa, prayer, the synagogue and the mosque, prejudice, as we all know, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. It turns out many of the same people have that same anti point of view, both to Jews and to Muslims. So we touch upon a whole variety of these parallels and similarities, and we each have built upon our cultural competence, not only because both of us came to America as immigrants, but both of us are attached to our Jewish identity and Jewish belonging, or our Muslim identity and Muslim belonging. And both of us have had the experience of being both American and still maintaining our distinct attachments to these other parts of our identity. So that's really what our book is about. And what we thought we would do is give a few examples of the kinds of processes, the pathways that both groups have chosen that are extraordinarily similar in many ways, but it is so undeniable, whether it's that both of us see ourselves as the children of Abraham, that both of us point our prayers in a particular direction to our holy cities, that both of us are very careful about what we eat and how we observe our traditions in our lives, and where we locate ourselves on the American spectrum. So I'm going to stop there and let Mucahit, my colleague and co-author, give you a little sense of some specifics beyond this sort of general overview.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Arnold and Francesca, for organizing this conversation. Sam offered the broad framework within which we wrote this book. I'm going to give a brief taste of what we do in the chapters. Let me say a few words about the nature of our approach. In our comparison of the two groups, we try to avoid any reductionist takes on our subject matter. We depicted parallel pictures without undermining the authenticity of each tradition. We saw as our task a historical and sociological juxtaposition of the experiences of observant Jews and observant Muslims in America. Our hope is that when Muslims read it, they will learn a lot about the Jewish equivalents of some of their own experiences. And when Jews read it, they will learn a lot about the Muslim equivalents of some of their own experiences. Holding each as a mirror to the other, our book intends to give various audiences the opportunity to develop a better understanding of other faith traditions. So Jews will learn about Muslim story, Muslims will learn about the Jewish story, non-Muslim and non-Jewish readers will learn about both. And everyone will learn about two stories of American religion. As you can see, we wanted this book to serve a lot of good purposes. I must add, no matter how similar they may be or become, the experiences of these two faith communities retain their unique dimensions. Sometimes they have commonalities, so to say, that are genetic. This may be understood to be theological, geographical, or genealogical. But some are recent. Some have origins in the pre-modern and pre-American histories, yet their contemporary shape is entirely American. Think of the adventures of kosher and halal. How slaughter rules eventually became lifestyle choices. Some of the overlaps and similarities are independent of the American context, but some are products of that very context. America, in its structural assimilation and cultural demands, make the two faith traditions look similar as they become more and more American. Today, I will briefly talk about the chapter on synagogue and mosque and their ventures as American institutions. Synagogue, as many of you know, is at once a place of worship, study, and gathering. Jewish prayer and Muslim prayer have some common characteristics. Daily prayers, tefillah and salat, involve body movements, recitations, vocalizations, and so on. Though individual prayers are fine, believers are encouraged by both traditions to pray in congregations. The place of worship is also a place of study. So synagogue or mosque typically end up being a shul and madrasa respectively. Prayers are ritual settings where devotion and publicness, that is, presence of others, create a combined spiritual environment that is supposed to transform the believer. Participation in collective chants and rituals is not only a meeting with God, but also a meeting with one's fellow believers. Prayer in congregation is a place where the numinous and the mundane meet and mix. Sam is the expert on synagogues, so I will say more about the mosques here. So what is a mosque? A mosque, masjid in Arabic, is a place to perform prostration, a gesture of submission, humility, awe, and glorification of God, a place where both individual and congregational prayers can be conducted. So a mosque is not a temple. A mosque is not a temple. It functions as a spatial tool. It is not a sacred institution without which a particular ritual would be impossible. While in terms of community, it's a key institution, in terms of theology, the mosque is not indispensable. One can pray outside the mosque, at home, in nature, or in any clean public place. The function of the mosque is dispersed both in society and in nature. So who leads the prayer? What is an imam, etc. are questions you can find answers to in other chapters of the book. But let me say a few more things. What makes American mosque specific? A mosque has an audio aspect to it. Adhan, the call to prayer, invites believers to prayer. Something taken for granted in the Muslim majority societies becomes a soundscapes issue in the American context. A mosque is typically a simple space, a large prayer area. In that space, there is a designated area called mihrab, where imam leads the prayer. And mosque has to be also oriented towards Mecca, as Sam mentioned. There is a sense of orientation in both faith traditions. And that can be a challenge about which I have written in my previous book. The walls are minimally decorated in a mosque, and most American mosques start their lives as converted buildings. I'm sure early synagogues had similar stories, but it's probably now much forgotten. They were not built as mosques. Still, only a small percentage of American mosques are built as mosques. Their architectural development, sense of confidence, securitization in times of crises, etc., are all part of the American story of mosques. The synagogue has, of course, traced a similar development from the inconspicuous storefront shul to the landmark synagogue in the suburbs. Before the American mosque looked like a mosque, the buildings in America that most frequently looked like mosques were synagogues. Today, both mosques and synagogues are unfortunately magnets for Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and both institutions find themselves forced to securitize themselves as a result. For Muslims in minority contexts, mosques acquire additional significance and new functions. Even if originally intended for purely ritual prayer purposes, increasingly the mosque is becoming social and communal. So mosques have to attend the multiple needs of their communities, from soup kitchen to basketball court, from changing functions of imam to the need for community relations. American mosque looks different enough to surprise Muslims from outside America. Muslim ritual prayer, the prescribed 5 daily prayers, salat, in some languages, namaz. These obligatory prayers are dispersed across the day from dawn to dusk. Weekly congregational prayer is called Jum'ah and happens on Friday. This is when mosques have parking problems and need friendly neighbors. Many American mosques hold several sequential Jum'ah prayers, both to accommodate large numbers of attendees and cater to their need to shoehorn the service into a busy workday. This is a very Muslim-specific issue. Friday is not organized around Muslim prayer times. because as a weekday and as a work day, and lacks the day-long openness of Saturday and Sunday, which in the West have long been allocated for weekly religious services. So Friday prayers take place in a relative rush, and while important community news is communicated during the service, the social aspects of assembly have to be delegated to weekends and evening hours. So a typical suburban mosque, for instance, would routinely hold youth groups, Quran study book clubs on weeknights, a featured program aimed at families on Friday evenings between Maghrib and Isha, and often a day-long program on Saturdays, and so on. So such activities, completely unremarkable for an American mosque, would be quite outside the norm in a traditional Muslim country. For American Muslims, the total time spent in the mosque increases, but it may be all not in one visit. So it's not like, concentrated in a particular time. So also, unlike overseas mosques, since the American mosque, like the synagogue, has become the epicenter of Muslim identity, mosque attendance is an opportunity for Muslim women to participate in collective Muslim identity. So in overseas, Muslims assume that women don't go or need to go to the mosque. Given American mosques' dual function as a community center and worship place, women's attendance at Friday prayer is a distinctive feature and expression of American Islam. Even though the space reserved for them has so far been mostly uninviting, a basement, an attic behind a curtain, places where the women cannot see the imam and rely on CCTV link to hear the sermon. So a large part of contemporary American Muslim women's activism revolves around highlighting the inadequacy of the spaces reserved for women in American mosques. This parallels many of the efforts that Jewish women, even the most traditional, have made to enlarge their space in the synagogue, which had so long been an overwhelmingly male domain. We see that America has a leveling effect on two theologically and historically comparable non-Christian Abrahamic faiths. Although on a theological level, the significance of worship in congregation is somewhat different, being a minority in the American context pulls the Muslim experience towards the Jewish pattern, such that it has come to resemble it more closely than it otherwise would. Thus, in comparison to mosques in traditional Muslim countries, the mosque in America is more like a synagogue in terms of the social role it plays, while at the same time it remains less congregational than the synagogue in America. So I will stop here and we can continue with a Q&A. Thank you very much.
I would thank you, Mucahit. I just want to add that anyone who listens to what you talked about in the Muslim experience and is only familiar with the Jewish experience knows that with a few switches, you would see the same problems. In addition to which, we haven't talked about imams and rabbis yet, but even the question of whether a woman can be an imam, a chaplain, that's certainly the case that the Jewish tradition has been grappling with for a while. Even its most observant elements within modern Orthodoxy. And we know that it's also something that Islam is grappling with. So when you hear these stories, there are just so many parallels. The idea of clergy. Clergy it's not something that makes sense in the Jewish tradition or in the Muslim tradition, but it makes sense in America. And suddenly an imam or a rabbi discovers that he or she is clergy. And that changes the entire, and has to represent the community, which has nothing to do with the qualities that originally were attached to being either an imam or a rabbi. So they have gone through many of these same experiences. And as Mucahit said, in many ways, they are so American, even though they think they are still standing apart. when you compare it. Just one last point, and that is the experience of Friday. So I am living in a place where Friday is a day off, in large measure, both because Jews and Muslims, where I live, Friday is a holy day, and it is not a time when things are rushed, as they would be in America. It's extraordinary how different America is.
Yeah, absolutely. America creates conditions for kind of certain parallelisms that we observe. So Muslim-Jewish comparison has its internal kind of similarities, overlaps, and then there are external, contextual, American-specific similarities that are induced by being in a largely Christian society, being a minority, being in a place where this is less so perhaps for Jewish case, your identity and religion kind of more strictly overlaps, but a sense of minorityness creates a specific climate, so to say. And so these communities respond to that context. And so we try to show really both those intrinsic or internal parallelisms, overlaps, kinship, if you wish, and this contextual American religion-specific transformations that each faith group goes through to feel at home in America. So,
and even
yeah.
if you take things like a kippah or a hijab, which once it is placed in a context like America, it takes on a meaning far beyond what it originally meant in its tradition, and it becomes a kind of ability to say, I'm different and I can do it in public, and you have to accept what it means. But it has become a symbol that's carried far beyond its original meaning. The same is with the processes or the transformation of what it means to have a kosher meal versus a halal meal. The same kind of process has now taken over halal as the transformation that the idea of kosher went through in America. And just as some of you may remember the ad, you don't have to be Jewish to love kosher, or kosher answers to a higher authority. Well, halal has taken on many of those same characteristics. So the similarities are just extraordinary, and we believe that each community has so much to teach the other about these similarities. And once the problem of the Middle East somehow become dissipated, if we live so long, then perhaps we can see that certainly in America, it's just striking how much we are truly cousins.
Absolutely. On the question of hijab and kippah, yarmulke, they are burdened with representation of entire community, and so it becomes a public expression, and phenomenologically speaking, it becomes the very identity. And so to handle it, to lighten that burden, then you have to rely on patriotism. So you end up having a flag hijab, for example, because those differences, they attract discrimination, negative looks, and so on. And so, and they're now more than what they are from a purely religious point of view. They are not that central to, Muslim or Jewish identity, and yet in the American context, they gain additional significance.
And
All
I'm
those
sure
factors are important in understanding the experiences of those communities. Go ahead.
So when you hear about the flag hijab, I'm sure many of you have seen the kippah that has New York Nets on it, or the Patriots football, or whatever, or Batman for that matter, or Superman, or who knows what, to say, well, it's different, but it's also American.
Indeed.
So I think maybe we can open it up to questions. I'm sure
Sure.
in this kind of an audience, there can be questions and a lot of comments as well. So we'll be happy to
Sure.
answer.
Sam, thank you. Mucahit, thank you. Very, very interesting presentation. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I think Francesca and I probably have a few, but it would be nice to open it up to the audience first. So we encourage you to either raise your virtual hand or unmute yourself. Robert, yeah, please.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love this project. You know, it really seems to be fundamentally a peacemaking project, and a counter discourse to perhaps, you know, what are referred to as like more right-wing elements that may be bent on the destruction of one side or the other. I was wondering if that was a conscious part of your project, and do you see, you know, hope for such initiatives moving forward?
I would say thank you, Bob. Bob is my colleague from John Jay. It's absolutely we had that in mind. This is a type of contribution we could make. We were not just sociologists. We knew religion from within, if you wish, and we are observers of American experience. So, you know, American context gave us an alternative space, a neutral space, so to say, where we can approach the question of Muslim Jewish identities, faith traditions, outside of the limitations placed by the situation in Israel-Palestine. We had that luxury, let me put it that way, and we had the good intention of doing it. Today, I think we are kind of in a tough time. You know, after the destruction in Gaza, it's very hard to sell it, but its value is going to become clearer as we move forward, hopefully with peaceful and less destructive conclusion to the conflict. But yeah, it's tough time. You know, both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are high. It's Muslims and the Jews are, you know, concerned. The identities are more reserved, less interested in trying to understand. But our hope is that, you know, our approach, which we kept really more in the domain of religion, sincere interest in living a religious life in modern society, that will have its appeal, and it will open up windows for many minds as they are exposed to it. But it's difficult time. Yeah.
I think it's important to keep in mind that part of our hope was that if we could simply share with Muslims what Jewish life is like, and if Muslims could share with Jews, particularly observant Jews, what Muslim life is like, that we would see that we have much more in common with one another than we do actually with the Christian majority that surrounds us. And if after the history of Jews in Christendom, we managed to get past that somewhat and live, particularly American Jews, in a Christian-dominated society, at least until the present, it seems quite reasonable that once each side learns about the other and we sort of find a way of getting past the static that we're living through, that knowledge really makes a difference, shining a light on something. It's just extraordinary. If you think about it, if you had a neighbor and that neighbor lived a life very much like yours, but you never knew what was going on the other side of the wall. And then you discovered through maybe someone who knew the both of you that you had so much in common and that you shared so much experience and desires and hopes that could only add something positive to the lives of both Jews and Muslims. Unfortunately, our timing was terrible. Our timing was such, even though it's often been said that before this latest conflict, that the Palestinians are the Jews of the Middle East, that in many ways the Palestinian desire for sovereignty and a national identity is quite reminiscent of what the early Zionists sought to do in Israel and in what was then called Palestine as well, and that each has learned from the other. Unfortunately, each has also taken some of the more negative aspects of the other, and that's the part we're living with now. But the pendulum hopefully will swing the other direction. I don't know whether living here in Israel as an American, I don't know whether I'm more worried about America these days than Israel, but we are clearly very much wrapped up in one another's problems.
Thank you so
Sam,
much.
you say that the timing was terrible. One could also make the argument that now more than ever, a book like this is profoundly needed.
We believe that, but it's very hard to sell people on the idea that Jews and Muslims are following similar paths when they're very much involved with the argument that no, we're on different paths. So yeah, I agree with you.
Hello.
We have a couple of
Read-
wonderful questions in the. Oh, okay, Nasser.
I'm sorry. I tried to do it on my phone to ask for raise my hand. I couldn't find it.
Okay, please go ahead.
So I'm joining you from Abu Dhabi, and thanks for my brother and friend Eli Abustin who invited me to join. Today in the news, in all the Arab news, the opening of the synagogue in the heart of Damascus, and the rabbi came back after almost 35 years. He was in New York. The rabbi and his family, they came back to Damascus. It was everywhere in the Arab news in the Middle East. And all the Arab news are celebrating the returning back of the rabbi to the synagogue and to the neighborhood, the Jewish neighborhood in Damascus. In fact, I think this book and this effort is badly needed now. So this is a time in which we have to work to save our children, grandchildren from the political disasters by the two sides. And I think we have to limit ourselves to discussion between Jews and Muslims and not to go to the politics of Palestine and Israel. This is a temporary thing. It will be solved one way or another in the near future. Nothing can last forever. We know that, both sides. Just I wanted to throw one idea here. I think there is another examples of Jewish Muslim interaction and working together. Last 2 months, I was in Virginia. I visited my friend Eli Epstein in New York. I told him I was there for 1 week. I performed Jum'ah prayer in the synagogue in Northern Virginia Hebrew congregation in Reston. And I used to pray in the other synagogue in Ashburn in Loudoun County for more than 20 years now. And by the way, the Jum'ah ceremony subject in the synagogue was about Gaza and Palestine inside the synagogue. So, and I talked to my friend Muhammad Haj Majid in Adam Center. He told me that they are holding some sort of meetings between Jewish and Muslim youth. So my idea now is, my point here, I raise it to you, whether you approve it or feel it is doable or not. I think we need to move from Jewish-Muslim dialogue to Jewish-Muslim actions in the society. This will bring the youth and the coming generation to know each other in a deep way, in a personal way. And another side, I think there is another aspects need to be brought up to the audience from both of you, the great authors of this book. I have the book here in my hand. My friend Eli gave me a copy, so I have it here. It is a good work, and it needed to also to have another treatise on the history of Muslim-Jewish relation. Will Durant, I think, had a theory that the Islamic civilization built on a coalition between Muslim and Jews, and Islamic civilization declined when this coalition broke up and the new coalition started with Christian and Jews. So I think we need to bring many things these days, because the situation, I'm afraid, the situation will have negative impact on the future generations. So we need to work hard in these days in order to send the right message. I went up with something when I stayed for almost 10 years in the 90s in the United States. And I used to go there for every year. Whenever I take any kind of flight, I used to ask for kosher. So kosher is a Jewish Muslim. I used to always to ask for kosher. And my last thing, when my daughter born in one of the hospital in Maryland, 1993, and nurses there, because my wife was wearing hijab in the same style, so same color of the Jewish head cover. So the head of the nurses there prevented me from going inside the room. She said, "No, you are a Jew. You are not allowed to go inside while she's giving birth." I told her I'm not a Jew. So this is, I think we have many stories to tell, and we have to now to emphasize on the positive aspects of our relation, and leave the political issues. It will be solved. Sooner or later, it will be solved, but we will still Jewish and Muslim regardless of Palestine and Israel. Thank you.
I wonder if I could follow up with a brief comment, since my brother Nasser was kind enough to mention me a few times. So on a note that I hope gives encouragement, especially to the two distinguished authors, but maybe to the whole audience as well. I gave a book to Nasser and another book to the president of NYU. And as a result of beginning that conversation, NYU is in fact planning to use that textbook this summer in a first program to bring clerics, Muslim and Jewish, together to study at NYU about each other's faith. So I'm just putting that out there, and hopefully we get a glimmer of hope. The world needs more than a glimmer, but that's what we have at the moment.
Well, I know that Mucahit and I share our feelings about the importance of making the connection between Jews and Muslims, but our role has been as academics, and we begin with the assumption that information is a necessary prerequisite to improving relations. If you are ignorant of what the other side does, if you don't know how similar you are, it's very difficult to feel that sense of kinship. I mean, yes, we can look at the Bible and we can talk about the long history of Jews in Muslim lands and Muslim in near Jewish communities, and Arnold, I know, has written about this in the ancient world, or in the medieval world. So there is a long history, and somehow along the way, as we moved into the modern world, a lot of that became forgotten. But I came to this idea originally when I was on a project working on fundamentalism, and there were Jews there, observant Jews, and there were observant Muslims. And we all had the same problems. We had to have special meals for us. We had to take time off to go to our prayers. And I thought to myself, my goodness, I feel much closer to these Muslims here than many of the other participants. And it just occurred to me that there is so much that we had in common that I was ignorant of. I think that the ignorance is an important feature of the breakdown of relations, and education offers an antidote to that.
Thank you. If we don't mind, I would like to go back to some of the written questions out of respect for posing the
Sure.
question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Deborah Kaufman has a question. Thank you both for such an important, intelligent conversation. Who makes up the observant in both comparisons? What do we mean by observant? That's a question actually we grappled with because Muslim and Jewish cases don't map each other perfectly, in the sense that in a Jewish case, categories are much more crystallized in terms of observance and so on. In the Muslim case, it is less so. But I kind of specified as mostly neo-traditionalist Muslim Americans as specifically observant. It's important to note that um, religiosity and conservatism are not the same thing. A person can be not so much conservative and yet very religious. It's a complex question, I think, especially in the Muslim case. Depending on your interpretation of things, your sense of religiosity or observance might not be equally visible with someone else's sense of religiosity and observance. So, nevertheless, as a kind of shortcut answer, I'd say, a neo-traditionalist strand within American Muslim community is the kind of closer to observant category in my mind, because Sam was focusing on Orthodox Jewish community as the kind of special case, and I focused on neo-traditionalist ones. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Sam, did you want to?
I just want to answer one of the questions as well, and that is a question that was asked about the distinction by Alan Benjamin, the distinction between clergy and imam and rabbi. Just a very simple one that I would point to is that clergy are expected to be able to talk to all religions, or be able to universalize a particular message. A clergyman, as we've seen, whether it's in offering benedictions in Congress or in a state house, or acting as a representative of one's people in a interdenominational or interreligious context. And that's not something that in the past, people who were very specific about their identities and their attachments to their parochial, their specific community we're used to. And in America, rabbis and imams have to learn to talk not only to their own worshipers and to their own people, but to other people. And that, of course, forces people to universalize a message.
Let's see. We have two questions or sort of comments from Sam Gruber. Sam, do you want to sort of consolidate and maybe
I can turn off my mic. They're just comments. They're not really, they don't need much discussion. I was fascinated to hear about the return of the rabbi to Damascus because, as I said, we documented those synagogues many years ago and have been wondering which ones still survived. But I want to speak to the last point about observance, because as a Reform Jew, I consider myself observant, but obviously not, my Orthodox friends don't consider me observant, or at least not in a traditional Jewish manner. They recognize my allegiance to Judaism and some traditions, but not in a halakhically complete way. But I want to say, where I live in Syracuse, it's curious. It's the Reform Jews who are probably not included in this study who have the most dialogue with our Muslim friends here, mostly because of politics, civil rights, and immigration policies. Whereas I'm not aware of a dialogue that goes on between our small Jewish Orthodox community and the growing Muslim population that we do have here. We have many more mosques than we have Orthodox shuls. And then lastly, we do have, at least in my congregation, the Reform congregation, there has been regular dialogue with rabbis speaking to Muslim communities and imams, or at least one imam, coming to speak at our shul. And then every year we have some more than one interreligious events where Jews, Muslims, and Christians all come together in conversation as well. All of that's, I haven't seen any of that since October 7th. I don't know what's happening since October 7th, but for many years, you know, we certainly were witnessing a very appreciative and warm rapport here. I can't say how it is in a bigger city where people are more fragmented, or they're able to have more coherent communities and be self-sustaining in that way. Anyway, it's great to see you, Arnold and Sam.
I don't doubt that that's the case, because part of the problem has been that the Orthodox Jews are in many ways the most ignorant of the comparative nature of Islam and Judaism. And so in many ways, at least from my perspective, it was important to show these Jews who are so much attached to the specifics of whether it's halakha or orthodoxy in a general way, that they need to be educated to understand that your Muslim neighbor, your Muslim cousin, has so much more in common with you. In many ways, what you point out, the common element in your dialogue with Muslims have to do with sort of your more American liberal values. Whereas what we're trying to point out here is that even for those who don't share those liberal values, who are very rooted in their parochial and orthodox lives, that you have as much, if not more, in common in many ways with your Muslim cousins than you would ever imagine.
Yes, I agree. And I would say that many of the Muslims I know here would not or do not share many of those liberal values. We find common ground on some issues, but certainly on many issues of women and gender identities and other types of economic issues, we disagree, or there we don't speak of those things.
I'm going to jump in here because I actually had a question that sort of relates to this. When you talk about America, I'm sort of wondering, is this something specific about America? Would you, and it's kind of an unfair question, but do you think these sorts of phenomena are also observable in Europe, say, or in South America? These kinds of similarities, or is there something about the American environment specifically that's at work here?
Yeah, I would say some of the factors have to do with being minority. So to the extent you are a minority in Europe, you are a minority in America, you know, it's the same. But there is American culture specific things. In Europe, Muslims encounter a whole spectrum of societies that are, well, there is more racism in Europe, let's put it that way. Okay, so America is a better place in terms of giving minorities a sense of belonging, in terms of feeling at home and so on. I mean, internally, America deserves a lot of criticism. It's our civic duty to blame it for anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. But ultimately, in a comparative perspective, America is much better place for both Jews and Muslims, in my understanding, in terms of allowing them to feel at home. In terms of respect for religious identity, you know, that whole thing, just the idea of religion being something positive in America versus in Europe, I think that's a big factor. So some of the elements are really American specific, while being minority overlaps with Europe, and others can be lined up. New Zealand, Australia, more immigrant based societies versus deeply rooted, ethnically exclusive societies in Europe.
I wish I could agree 100% with Mucahit, but I think in America we're at an inflection point now. And I'm not sure that I would argue that Europeans are more racist than Americans. I think Americans have a long way to go when it comes to racial and ethnic prejudice. And frankly, you know, the Jews are in a strange position now as their political, in America, certainly as their political allegiances are going through flux. If I were a Muslim living in America now, I'd feel a lot more worried, although there'd be plenty to worry about as a Jew now. So we're still, frankly, we're still living in a pre-Trumpian America in our minds. I think Mucahit and I, and we thought that that was a passing phenomenon, but as I watch here from a distance, what's happening to the country that was my home for most of my life, I can't say that I think, things are wonderful back home and they're just tough here in Israel. I'm not sure who's having a harder time. There are a lot of, I live in a country now where many people think that Trump is God's messenger. And I understand that there are many people in America that feel that way. I don't want to get into the politics of America, but it certainly seems that something is happening, and it's very difficult in these times to predict what the future will bring. I do believe that peace will sooner or later come between Muslims and Jews because we have so much in common. On the other hand, sometimes people who have too much in common with one another, that's where, you know, the people who often kill each other are in the same family. So it's a problem.
Yeah, certainly we are at a turning point, and yeah, I agree. But as far as American Muslim community is concerned, they absolutely feel much more at home in America than Muslims in Europe. So, you know, that was well-established facts, but things are changing fast. And let's hope, pray that it improves and it looks. Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. I do want to note a question that Susan Glick has put in the chat that hopefully will help us kind of think about how we can be part of something better. Anything we can do to strengthen Jewish-Muslim ties in New York? And I'm especially interested to hear about this as someone who kind of works on the history, as Sam noted, in New York. So yeah, do either of you have some thoughts? What can we do?
Well, I'd like to have everybody read our book in New York, and that would be a good start. I mean, the truth is we were both living in New York when we wrote this book. And I think many of our experiences with the other come from New York and Chicago. I mean, New York and Chicago, in some ways, are places where both Jews and Muslims live cheek by jowl, close to one another. Even someone asked about the difference between the Hasidic Jews and the modern Orthodox Jews. Well, if you go to Borough Park and some of the Hasidic communities, right next to one another, you find Muslims living right next to Hasidim. So New York is a place where there's an enormous amount of ignorance about people right next door. We, neither Mucahit or I, we're not negotiators or people who are involved in peacemaking. I wish I could, but I don't. But we are people who are trying to provide information We're trying to do it not in a dry way, but in a way that's engaging. And yes, the fact that NYU wants to use this is very inspiring for us. We think that our book is not just an academic exercise, but we think that it has a great deal to offer because information is among the most valuable things that people can have. We want to shine sunlight on something that has remained in the shadows or been forgotten.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think a lot is already known by people in terms of dialogue, in terms of, there's Salam Shalom, Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, many initiatives between synagogues and mosques. A lot was happening, as Samuel Gruber also mentioned. Um, let's hope that things will be back on track and, go in a better direction. And our book is a small contribution in that direction. So, yeah, thank you.
very good. Any last questions? Okay, if not, then I do want to thank our speakers for a really an important, a timely talk. And I guess I'm somewhat heartened that we ended on a bit of an up note, thinking about what we can do and maybe kind of move ourselves out of the current situation. Francesca, do you want to put the book offer one more time in the chat? You can do that. And I think we have both given you the links to our respective centers. It's wonderful to see everyone here. And I know that I look forward to seeing you at future events through the Queens College Center for Jewish Studies, and I'm sure Francesca feels the same way about events through the Graduate Center for Jewish Studies. Sam, Mucahit, thank you very much.
Thank you, and it was a pleasure being home, if only in the internet.
Thank you for this great talk. Thank you both.
Thank you all.
And buy the book. There's a code for 30% off in the chat.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace,
Take care.
salam.
Hey,
Shalom.
Sam. Hi, Sam.
I'm Moshe.
How you doing?
Good to see you. You look well.
Thank God. You look pretty chipper. It's good.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, guys.